High noon hammered Tombstone Creek, flat and bright, the kind of light that left no shade for sins to hide. Dust hung in the heat like a veil. A fly worried the corner of Sheriff Kane's eye, and he didn't blink. He stood with his boots planted square on the sun-blasted planks outside the saloon, black hat, low, duster lifting in the dry wind like a flag nobody saluted anymore. The outlaw across from him, Calder Nash, teeth like chipped china, rolled his shoulders loose and smiled without warmth. 3 counts, the mayor croaked from somewhere behind the water trough. Then you boys do what you aim to do. The town was a ring of breath, held tight. Shop doors half closed, curtains twitching, children hauled off the street by rough hands that weren't quick enough to stop what was already set in motion. The gallows at the far end of the square creaked, even without a breeze, rope swaying, a reminder that law had a face here, and it wasn't always kind. Kane's silver badge spun once in his fingers. He could feel every scratch in the metal, like braille carved by blood. The pearl handle of his Colt sat easy against his palm. Easy wasn't peace. He breathed in the smell of hot wood, spilled whiskey, oiled leather. He heard a church bell in the next town carry faint on the wind, as if God were counting for them. 1, the mayor managed. Nash's right hand danced. The man loved the dance. 2, Elias Finch, blacksmith, stubborn friend since the year of the flood, stepped forward from the crowd. Kane, don't. His voice cracked on dust. He took one more pace into the open, palm lifted as if he could stop daylight with it. Not like this. 3, guns flashed. Kane drew a heartbeat late. He knew it in the split of a hair, felt the shape of failure bloom open in his chest, like a second mouth. Nash's shot whipped the air. Kane's Colt bucked. Flame peeled off the barrel, but the scream that split the square didn't come from Nash. Elias jerked like a man yanked by a hook, the bullet punching clean through his shoulder and out his back in a spray that flecked Kane's coat. He stumbled 2 steps, spun, and collapsed hard enough to shake dust from the porch beams. The world narrowed to the sound of his friend trying to breathe. Kane was already on his knees, boots skidding in blood. He shoved a palm into the wound and felt heat and life sluice through his fingers. Stay with me, Elias. Look at me. His voice was low, flat, a man fighting panic the way he'd fought bushwhackers in a winter canyon, without room to miss. Hell, Nash laughed, holstering with a flourish. Sheriff can't even draw on time. He tipped his hat to the crowd. Tell your wives I came calling, and the law blinked. 2 of his riders peeled off the shade of the livery and started to move, casual as snakes. No one answered, no one dared, not while Kane was on his knees, not while the dust still glittered with fresh red. Get me clean cloth, Kane said without looking up. Now. No one moved. The town had gone stone. Elias's breath rasped shallow. His eyes were glassy with pain, but they found Kane's face and clung. Pocket, he whispered, coughing wet. Inside. Kane tore open the blood-slick coat. His fingers found a folded paper gone tacky with red, wax seal, crushed, but still bearing the stamped eagle. Federal seal. He didn't open it. Not there. Not with the heat on his neck and a bullet humming in the boards by his knee. Nash's second warning shot. A little to the left this time. Stand up, Sheriff, Nash called, amused. Can't bury your friend under my boots. You want another try? You can have it. I like sport. Kane looked up through the veil of his hat brim. For a long moment he was pure stillness, the kind that rattled other men more than shouting ever could. "Pick up that casing," he said softly to Nash, voice carrying like cool water. "You'll want a souvenir of the last second you breathed easy." Nash's smile thinned. "Talks cheap, lawman. Law ain't always justice," Kane said, blood creeping over his knuckles. "But justice rides with me." Elias's hand scrabbled for Kane's wrist, iron grip twitching and failing. "Listen," he managed. Don't show that letter. Not yet." His gaze flicked past Kane's shoulder to the gallows, to the empty window of the abandoned courthouse beyond it, where swallows stitched the air with their dark, quick wings. "He's watching." "Who?" Kane leaned closer until he felt Elias's breath against his cheek, hot and coin metal bitter. "Badge," Elias whispered, "but not yours." His fingers slackened. Kane pressed harder, fighting the useless fight a man fights when he knows the tide is bigger than his hands. The heat, the stink of gun oil, the whispering crowd, everything tilted, then steadied. Kane set his jaw until it ached. "Elias." The name came out like a promise, ground through teeth. The blacksmith's chest hitched once, twice, stilled. For a few seconds, no one in Tombstone Creek dared learn how to breathe again. Kane lifted his head. The sun made his eyes into chips of metal. He stood with the easy speed of a man whose joints were tired of kneeling in blood, lifted his friend's body, and laid it gentle on the porch boards beneath the sheriff's office window. The painted letters above cracked and flaked, law peeling in summer. He slid the folded paper deep into his own duster, feeling the shape of it like a thorn against his ribs. He turned, and the square turned with him. Faces, so many faces. The old woman who brought honey to the jail every spring, eyes shining with anger she'd never tasted before. The storekeeper counting with breath, lips moving around prayers he didn't remember he knew. A boy on the hitching rail, bare feet black with dust, staring at the red on Kane's cuffs as if it were a map to adulthood. "Say something," the mayor whispered, voice cracked. "Say anything." Kane didn't. Words were nails he couldn't hammer straight right then. He looked instead down the length of the street, past the livery and blacksmiths, past the church steeple that threw a thin blade of shadow, to that abandoned courthouse whose doors hung open like a mouthful of splinters. Once the judge there had spoken sentences that walked men to the rope. Now swallows ruled the rafters and wind read indictments to empty benches, law's husk, hollowed and echoing. He tasted the old anger rising, the one that wanted the simplest answer because the simple ones bled quickest. His temper was a fast horse he'd spent half a life holding by the reins. But right now, the horse pulled hard. A rope hissed somewhere, thrown over a crossbeam. The sound took him back to another afternoon, to a wife's voice at his ear and a child's hand like a bird's foot in his palm. Old ghosts pressed close. He swallowed them. Bootsteps scraped behind him, hobnailed, measured. Kane pivoted just enough to see the mayor sidle forward, hat clutched, a slick of sweat already soaking the band. "Sheriff," the man began, and Kane could hear the capital letter wobble. "There'll be an inquest. Town charter says when a man dies in a called out, the sheriff stands down until the cowardly finish their whispering," Kane said, without heat. The mayor flinched like a struck mule. "Until the law looks like law," someone else said. The voice came from the shade between the bank and the telegraph, where the light failed to land even at noon. A man in a travel-stained gray coat stood there, hat brim low, boots too polished for trail work. He wasn't dusted like the town. Dust slid off him. A badge glinted on his vest for a heartbeat, and vanished when he shifted, silver, but cut different. Federal, or counterfeit. Hard to say from that apology of shade. Kane didn't turn his whole body toward the stranger. He shifted his weight just enough to tell anyone who knew him that a choice hovered like a knife point over soft wood. The Colt at his hip found a gravity all its own. "Plenty of lawmen in this territory," the gray coat said, easy, some faster than others. Murmurs trembled through the ring of faces. Some were pity, some were hunger. A few were mean little joys a town can't help itself from feeling when the tall man stumbles. Kane glanced down. His badge lay where it had fallen, slicked dark. He bent and picked it up. For a moment he watched the disc spin in his fingers, sun flashing off it, strobing his knuckles with light. When it settled, he thumbed the edge clean against his coat and pinned it back over his heart. The metal burned cold. He lifted Elias again, dead weight, holy weight, and carried him inside the jailhouse, past the cell doors with their iron teeth and their smell of old tears, to the table where he'd set 100 suppers and 24 confessions. He covered his friend with a blanket that still remembered campfire smoke. Then he came back out and shut the door gentle, because a man can be gentle and still be dangerous. The square waited for the verdict of his eyes. Kane let them look. Let them see the wet down his sleeve, the scratches on his hands where a dying man had clawed for one more breath. Let them see the set in his jaw that meant something had just ended and something else had begun. A telegraph runner shouldered through the crowd, hat too big for his head, face a red coin of panic. "Message for Sheriff Kane," he yelped, voice breaking. He held out a yellow slip, corners softened by sweat. The ink bled in a few places, but the words were clear enough when Kane took it. "Arrive dusk. Suspend operations. Hold all evidence. M." The signature was a single letter burned into the paper like a brand. The boy swallowed. Ryder brought it up from the depot, said it come down the line fast, said the sender's a Federal. Kane folded the message over once, then again, and slid it into the same pocket as the sealed letter from Elias. 2 waits, 2 futures. Wind finally found the square, lifted dust in lazy golden sheets. Somewhere above, a swallow cut a ribbon of shadow over the abandoned courthouse door. The mayor cleared his throat. "Sheriff Kane," he said, trying on courage that didn't fit, "by authority of the town council and pending inquest." A woman's voice cut him off, sharp as a file. "We saw you miss on purpose." Kane's hand stilled over the pearl handle. The gray coat smiled in the shade and lifted his chin as if to say, "Go on." "Finish it," Kane said, eyes never leaving that shadowed badge waiting at the edge of noon. And the mayor, palms damp, drew in breath to speak the words that might strip a man of his badge in front of his own gallows. The blood would not come off. Kane scrubbed at the pump behind the jail until the water ran pink, and then pale, and then clear. Still his hands looked stained in the seams, a map of failure sunk into the creases. The wind pushed heat through the alley, smelled of horse and coal smoke, and the bell up the slope tolled once, twice, slow as penance. Inside, Elias Finch lay under a cavalry blanket on the jailhouse table, boots side by side, like he was only resting before the noon shift. Iron shackles hung on a peg by the cells, mute and black, the law's teeth watching a lawman who had bitten too late. Word went out on soft feet and hard tongues. Storefronts emptied, Curtains split, and Tombstone Creek gathered like weather. Faces were gray with dust, red with heat, and bright with that quick human hunger for a verdict that feels like relief. Kane stood in the doorway, duster stiff with dried blood, hat brim low enough to make his eyes into gunmetal coins. The mayor found his courage at last and climbed the office steps, hat crushed in both hands. "There'll be an inquest before sundown," he said, voice carrying more than it meant to. "By town charter, it's the abandoned courthouse. We'll hear witnesses. We'll decide." Decide what? Kane could have asked. Whether a heartbeat can be called a crime. Instead, he looked past the mayor, down Main, where the gallows rope swung in no wind. He felt the telegram in his pocket. "Arrive dusk. Suspend operations. Hold all evidence." Bim. And the hard corner of the blood-stiff letter he had taken from Elias's coat. He had not opened it. Not yet. A dying friend had said, breath hot and metallic, "Not yet." Kane wasn't sure if obedience tonight was duty or superstition. The blacksmith's wife, Elias's wife, came through the crowd like a storm with no lightning, face white, with the kind of grief that turns to bone. She did not look at the sheet on the table. She looked at Kane's hands, at the faint rust there, and flinched as if it might jump. "You were slow," she said, voice soft as sand. "My man paid for your thinking." Silence took the doorway. Kane felt the town lean toward him, waiting for the steel that could cut them all free. Anger, denial, something that would make this easier. He gave them none of it. He stepped forward. He said, "I drew. It wasn't enough." "Or you missed on purpose," came another voice, a dry merchant's tenor, the one that had accused him in the square. "Everyone saw it. You and Nash. Maybe you worked a piece. Maybe the price was one man." Whispers took the gaps. Saw Elias with strangers. Heard them in the alley last night. Talk of quick money if a hammer swung slow. Rumor dripped from eaves like tar in the heat, running downhill to pool around the only boots everyone recognized. Kane's badge spun once between thumb and forefinger, catching noon and throwing it back in angry shards. Law ain't always justice. The line had cut itself out of him an hour ago like a blade, but now it lay quiet, a thought with its hat off in church. He slid the badge home. "I'll be at the courthouse," he said, and the crowd parted like he was a lamp the wind couldn't quite put out. The abandoned courthouse took the day's light and broke it into ribbons. Dust hung high where rafters gaped, and the judge's bench wore a crack the width of a knife. Swallows looped the open roof, stitching silence. Someone had pushed the gallows cart up from the yard below and parked it by the back wall, as if the room might need both kinds of verdict before supper. Kane set his hat on the rail and the Colt on the scarred wood beside it. The weight of the letter in his duster pocket felt heavier here, as if words can gain iron when truth is the only weapon left. They packed the benches, even those who never set foot in rooms with rules. The preacher came with his collar crooked, the livery owner with nails still in his teeth. Boys who should have been counting corn-sized stones under the bridge stood on tiptoes and learned a new catechism: how to watch a man be measured. The mayor read the charter, hands shaking just enough to make the paper whisper. Called out duel. Officer present. Civilian death. Sheriff to stand down pending judgment. His eyes kept darting to Kane's holster. "We'll hear the town." Voices broke over the rail like surf. "I saw Elias in the back room of my place. said the saloon keeper, not meeting Kane's eyes, talking to a fella in a gray coat, coin on the table. "My boy says Nash's riders were at the smithy 2 nights back," someone else offered. "No work that late unless it's secrets." "Elias owed no man," countered a farmer with sun in the cracks of his face. "He fixed my wheel last week and wouldn't take a cent." The blacksmith's wife stood at last, with the steadiness of someone holding herself over a canyon by the fingers and refusing to look down. "My husband was a good man," she said. "He'd meet with the devil if he thought it would keep the devil off our door. Don't you make him smaller in death than he was in life." Kane listened, jaw tight enough to grind flour. He catalogued details the way another man might count loose nails: gray coat, coin, late voices. The letter in his pocket warmed like a coal. He could pull it now, hold up the eagle seal flecked with his friend's blood, uncork the room with words from a dead man. But Elias's last whisper hissed again in his ear, "Not yet," and sometimes honoring the dead is the only way the living keep their shape. He kept his hand off the pocket. The mayor cleared his throat. The moment had come that strips men or clothes them different. "By charter," he said, "the sheriff must surrender badge and sidearm until the inquest resolves. Sheriff Kane." Kane picked up his Colt before the line finished, worked the cylinder with a grim patience, then set it down, muzzle away from anyone, like a man placing bread on a table he no longer trusted himself to eat. He unpinned his badge, felt the cool circle lift off his chest. That small absence burned. He laid the silver on the judge's cracked bench. The disc skated a little and wobbled to a stop, sun quivering on the edge. The room exhaled, as if a thunderhead had moved a mile east. From the doorway, a chuckle rasped. Not laughter, sand in a throat. "Saints preserve me," drawled a rancher's cousin nobody liked. Kane finally learned to kneel. Kane's eyes found him, then let him go. He was choosing the exact violence he'd bring into this room, and right now the only thing that deserved a bullet was the heat. "You want me to stand down? I'll stand down," he said, voice level as a carpenter's bubble. "But you don't decide what I am." He looked at the blacksmith's wife. Nor does grief. She flinched like he'd struck her, and he hated himself for the truth he could not sand smooth. He reached to gather the badge again, habit more than defiance, and the mayor's hand shot out like a scared bird, fingers landing on the silver. "Leave it," the mayor said. "For the record." "The record," Kane said, and something rough smiled way down in him. He glanced up at the rafters where the swallows turned their dark stitches and pictured the town clerk's shaky script. Sheriff suspended, crowd satisfied, sun relentless. Records were polite graves. A boy burst through the back door so fast the light around him staggered. Same telegraph runner, hat too big, eyes wilder. "Message came down the wire again," he blurted, tripping over the threshold. He clutched a fresh yellow like it might bite. "From the same hand. Says to hold the sheriff if he tries to ride. Says federals comin' to fetch what belongs to them." "What belongs?" the preacher asked, bristling. "This town isn't a thing to fetch." The boy swallowed. "It don't say, just the letter M, big as a brand." Gray coat, coin on wood. A letter that cut his ribs when he breathed. The room tilted a little, a house settling after a storm. Kane felt every gaze tacked to him again. The merchant with the dry voice stood, sniffed the air like a coyote. "Search him," he said. "If the federal wants a thing, odds are the guilty man's got it in his pocket." The benches groaned. Men rose, not all of them eager, some just exhausted enough to follow the loudest fear. 2 stepped off the aisle like oxen, arms out. The gallows cart creaked in the corner, as if remembering its lines. Kane's hand found the edge of the letter through the cloth. He could give it up to a room that didn't deserve it. He could draw and make his own inquest out of lead. He did neither. He took 1 step back and away from his Colt, palms open, where everyone could weigh them. "You lay hands on me," he said calmly, "and I swear by all your Sunday shirts, I will not be the first man bleeds in here." His voice dropped to a whisper that carried anyhow. "But one of you will be." The oxen stopped. A fly skated the air between faces. Somewhere outside, a hammer fell 3 times, and a far dog answered. The mayor's hands trembled on the badge. He was a small man with a big town in his grip. "We'll vote," he said desperately. "We'll do it decent. Who favors suspension?" Hands rose like tired wheat. Not all. Enough. The count took forever, because some men had to watch Kane before remembering how to lift their arms. "It's decided," the mayor whispered. "So it is," Kane said. He did not reach for the badge this time. He looked at his friend's widow and lifted his chin like a man about to take rein without moving. "Elias stepped into a bullet meant for me," he said. "Ain't a soul in this room gonna step between me and the truth meant for him." Then the courthouse door blew inward on a gust that smelled of sun-hot leather and telegraph smoke. Dust rolled, and in the bright rectangle stood a silhouette in a travel-stained gray coat, hat brim low, boots too polished for real trail. A star flashed once on his vest, not county cut, not state. The stranger's voice filled the ruined rafters. "Hold your votes." He stepped over the threshold, and the badge on his chest caught the light again. Federal issue, eagle-etched mean. "Name's Merrick, United States Marshal," he said, gaze pinning Kane and the mayor both. "I'll be taking custody of your sheriff, and the letter he's hiding on his person." The swallows cut one last loop and fled through the missing roof as the room remembered how to breathe. Wind scraped the street clean by morning, but blood had a way of clinging. Sheriff Kane knelt where the duel had broken the town's breath, fingertips brushing grit that still smelled like iron. Rafe Mallory's hat lay crowned down beside a scuffed boot track. The felt was punched through, a black mouth where a bullet had gone hunting bone. The sun was pale, the air brittle. Somewhere a shutter clicked. Nervous hands, prying eyes. Kane's silver badge dragged a slow circle against his thumb, as if it wanted to spin on its own. He stood and tried his draw, like a man testing a word he no longer trusted. The rawhide thong caught, half a heartbeat, a drag of leather over hammer spur, and he felt the same slow snarl he'd felt yesterday when he came up 1 second late. Someone had wet that thong, tied it cruel tight, let the desert sun shrink it into a noose around his speed. That wasn't bad luck. That was a hand he knew. The jailhouse sat where it always had, square and stubborn, boards sunburned to the color of old whiskey. The key was cold in his palm. Inside, the air held tin cup stink and the quiet rattle of chain. Judd Crow, the gunman who'd faced Rafe, sat easy on the bunk, hat tipped low, a bruise like spilled wine along his jaw. Deputy Whit Ransom leaned in the doorway, brass star bright, blue eyes pretending they hadn't slept. "Morning, Whit." Kane's voice came dry. "Who cleaned my rig yesterday?" Whit's smile was small and sorry. "You did, like always." Kane rolled his shoulder. The duster whispered, "Funny then, how my thong felt like a noose. Must be the weather learning new tricks." Crow's grin showed a coin-thin gold tooth. "Weather ain't the only thing changes fast, Sheriff." Kane turned his steel-gray gaze on the prisoner. "You're here because I dragged you in, not because you got religion. Talk plain." Crow studied the sheriff through lazy lids. "Plain enough. A bell rang early. Your hand stuck. A friend of yours told me the morning'd be clumsy for you." He tapped his temple. "Told me to keep my eye off your iron and on Rafe's. Said I'd have one clean shot if I took it quick." The room shrank to a flicker of dust motes floating in a shaft of light. Wit shifted, boot heel squeaking. "He's jawing. Crow'll say anything to gum your head." Kane felt the old scar on his jaw pull tight as a hook. "Whose words were they, Crow?" "Didn't give me a name." Crow's smile thinned. "Didn't need to. Blue-eyed deputy wearing brand-new pride. Smelled like bay rum and a lie." Wit straightened as if a wire had tugged him. "That's enough." "Is it?" Kane asked softly. He stepped closer to the bars, close enough to taste iron. "You watched me reach for the law. You watched my hand fail, and a good man die. If you're lying, Crow, I'll hang you over that failure, inch by inch, all the way to the knot." Crow lifted his hands, wrists chained. "Sheriff, I ain't much for poetry, but I know a paid town when I smell one. Your mayor's pockets jingle. Your poker queen down at the Silver Ace keeps ledgers that'd curl a preacher's hair. Maybe your friend Rafe's name's in there, too." Kane spun his badge once, twice, metal flashing like a trapped sun. Law or truth? The choice had teeth. "Wit, fetch Lorna Vale." His voice dropped to a quiet that had made worse men than Crow falter. "And while you're at it, bring me the black notebook she keeps under the floorboard behind her whiskey crates." Wit blinked, then scowled. "You accusing Lorna now?" "I'm looking for ink, not sin." Kane's mouth barely moved. "Go." Wit hesitated, a sliver, no more, then tipped his hat and left, spurs ticking like a countdown across the porch. When Lorna finally came, she came with heat, perfume over tobacco, silk that clung to dust with a lover's persistence. Her eyes clocked the cell, the sheriff, the absent deputy. "Your boy Wit said you wanted ledgers," she said, words brittle. "You know what happens to a woman misplaces a town's secrets?" "Sometimes she survives it," Kane said, and held out a hand. Lorna stared, then sighed, and from beneath her shawl produced a thin black book, bound in cracked calf. It smelled like spilled rye and arithmetic. Names, amounts, a web of neat betrayals. Eddings, Mayor Brant Eddings, twice monthly. Crow's name, yes, and Rafe's too, written thrice, amounts small but regular. The page trembled under Kane's thumb. Betrayal wasn't a single knife. It was 100 quiet cuts. Heat rose behind his eyes and had to go somewhere, so he let it into his jaw, into the set of his shoulders. Rafe took money. His voice was sand over steel. Lorna's mouth softened. "Not how you think. He paid to cover his sister's debts. Crow had her near broke, and Eddings kept the trap greased. Rafe thought he could buy her free without dirtying your hands. He should have come to you, but pride's its own hangman." The jail door lifted and banged. Wit again, rain dark on his hat brim, though the sky was still hard blue. "Judge Purcell's called an inquest for sundown," he said. "Mayor's building a gallows frame on the square. Says the town wants closure." Wit swallowed. says it's for Crow. Or me, Kane said, and the words felt truer than wisdom. He closed the ledger, set it on his desk, and looked up into Whit's eyes like a man checking the weather one last time. You were at my right shoulder yesterday, son. Tell me you didn't touch my holster. Whit's jaw worked. For a breath, boy and badge fought in his face. Then the boy fled. I tightened it a hair, he muttered. You looked shook. I thought Snug would steady you. You didn't think I'd need speed, Kane said. You didn't think I'd need what keeps a man I love breathing. He let the hurt show, just enough. Don't lie to me again. Something in Whit cracked, a sound you can't hear but feel. His chin lifted. I ain't your son, he said, and I'm tired of living in Rafe Mallory's shadow. Maybe the town is too. Kane stared long enough to strip paint. Go oil that thong loose, he said finally, voice low. We do this by the book. By dusk, thunder crawled over the hills like a chained dog. The gallows frame rose against the bruised sky, new pine, raw and pale. Townsfolk gathered in knots, faces pinched, voices a hive. Kane set 2 lanterns inside the jail, yellow eyes that made shadows behave. The ledger lay open. The cell clanked shut behind Crow. Whit hung the keys on their hook with exaggerated care. Rain began, first as dust kisses, then as needles. Lorna's shadow crossed the frosted glass. Kane, she called through the door. Eddings is drink mad. Says your badge don't buy you grace tonight. Kane lifted the badge and pressed its cool circle to his palm. Law ain't always justice, but justice rides with me. He didn't say it. He felt it, old as the scar at his jaw. The thunder cracked closer, and underneath it, a different sound, metal against metal. A lock turned where no key should be. Kane spun, body already moving. The cell stood open, chains slack, like molted snakes. Crow was gone. Whit! Kane's shout tore the room in two. The back door sagged with rain. Fresh boot prints bled toward the alley. A length of chain lay dropped, one cuff still closed, as if someone had wanted the sound of shackles to say, this was done by the law. He hit the street. Rain hammered hats and faces. The gallows loomed like a promise with a timetable. Through the slick dark, he saw 2 silhouettes at the far end of the alley. Crow's narrow shoulders, Whit's rigid posture, a lantern swinging between them like a trapped sun. Whit! Kane's voice cut, clean as a blade. Don't do this. Whit turned. Water cut lines down his cheeks. Or maybe they were something else. He lifted the lantern higher, and the light found a scrap of oilcloth in his fist, a folded paper with the governor's seal broken and muddied. Judge Purcell's order, Whit called. Says Crow gets moved to territorial custody. Says you're compromised. I'm the sheriff of this town, Kane said, rain slicking the brim of his black hat, duster clinging heavy to his shoulders. There ain't a piece of wax in the territory outranks the truth, I know. That's the thing, Whit said, voice shaking with something like grief, something like fury. You don't know. You never asked why Rafe met Crow in the first place. He was going to turn on you, Kane. Make a deal to save his sister and sell out your badge to Eddings. I heard it from the mayor's own lips. I tightened your holster because I thought you'd shoot before you listened. The words struck like hail. Kane saw Rafe's grin over whiskey, the way it had always come with a flinch. He saw a sister's ruin in ledger ink. He saw Eddings's sleek smile and the gallows lifting like a rib cage. Friendships weren't chains. They were bridges. Bridges burned. Kane took one step closer. Hand Crow back. We'll read every line of this town together and hang the right man at dawn, or I'll bury you with what's left of us wit, because I can't let justice turn bastard in my hands. Crow snorted. Preacher talk in a rainstorm. Wit looked from Kane to Crow, lantern shaking. Lightning winked on wet wood. Somewhere, a hammer cocked. The sound slid through the rain like a snake. Wit's eyes jumped past Kane's shoulder and went wide. Sheriff. Kane turned, just enough to taste the shape of the gun aimed at the base of his skull. By order of the court, Judge Purcell's voice boomed from the darkness, oily and certain. Sheriff Kane, drop your iron. You're under arrest for tampering with evidence and the murder of Rafe Mallory. The lantern flared white in Wit's hand. The gallows stood black behind Purcell, two nooses swaying in the storm like punctuation marks waiting for names. The storm rolled in from the west, low clouds dragging their shadows over the rooftops of Dry Creek. Sheriff Kane stood on the boardwalk, coat heavy with dust and rain, his silver badge dulled to a faint glint. The town had not forgotten that he had drawn 1 second late. The memory of his friend lying dead in the street clung to him like smoke, and whispers followed him wherever he walked. But that evening the whispers carried a new edge. An arrival. A carriage creaked into town, black lacquer dulled by the storm. The horses stamped and snorted as if sensing the mood that hung over Dry Creek. From it stepped Marshal Elijah Durning, tall, lean, and sharp-eyed. His hat was spotless, his boots polished, his badge gleaming brighter than any Kane had ever seen. Durning had the air of a man who did not bend, the kind who measured others not by their hearts, but by the law written in books miles away. He carried himself like the law was not a burden, but a weapon, and the moment his eyes met Kane's, the townsfolk knew this was the authority sent to pass judgment. Sheriff Kane, Durning said, voice steady as iron, you and I have business. The rain pattered against tin roofs. No one breathed. Kane tilted his head, steel-gray eyes unreadable. Business, Marshal, or reckoning? Durning did not flinch. Your name's carried far these last weeks. Some call you a lawman, others call you a killer who hides behind the badge. I came to see which is true. The weight of those words pressed against the gathered crowd. A saloon door creaked open, faces peered out, eager for spectacle, desperate for someone else to hold Kane accountable for the blood still staining their memory. Inside Kane's chest, guilt twisted. He had failed his friend, failed the town, and now a man with federal authority stood before him, ready to strip him of everything he held on to. But Kane's hand did not drift to his Colt. Instead, he let the silence stretch. Dust swirled at his boots, rain tapping the brim of his black hat. Finally, he spoke. Law ain't always justice, Marshal. You'll find that truth soon enough. Durning's jaw tightened. Justice will be measured by me, by the law of this territory, and if you stand in its way. His eyes flicked to Kane's badge, rain dripping silver on its surface. Then you're no better than the men you hang. The words rippled through the onlookers. Kane heard their murmurs, felt their judgment. Some nodded toward Durning, glad to see power greater than Kane finally arriving. Others shifted uneasily, remembering nights when Kane's quick draw had spared them from outlaws prowling the edge of town. The confrontation broke only when thunder cracked, rattling the windows. Durning turned, gesturing for his deputies, men Kane had never seen before, Strangers with rifles slung across their shoulders. They moved with the precision of soldiers, not the weary gait of town-born lawmen. They weren't here to help Kane. They were here to replace him. Kane walked back toward his office, boots echoing on the wet boards, refusing to let them see the tremor in his hands. Inside, the jailhouse felt colder than ever. His silver badge spun between his fingers, slow, deliberate. He stared at it, then at the empty cells lined in shadow. For years, this badge had been his anchor. Now, under Durning's shadow, it felt like a chain. That night the town gathered in the saloon, voices buzzing with speculation. Durning had already begun to interrogate the townsfolk, asking questions about Kane's duel, about loyalties, about blood debts unpaid. Some spoke against Kane. Others stayed silent, afraid. Kane sat alone at his desk, lantern light flickering against the walls, when footsteps scraped outside. A knock followed, firm, commanding. Marshal Durning entered without waiting. His coat dripped with rain, and his presence filled the room like a storm given shape. "I've heard enough," he said. "Tomorrow I'll convene judgment at the courthouse. The people will speak. You'll answer for the life you took. If you're guilty, you'll hang under the gallows you've filled with others." The lantern flame wavered, casting long shadows across Kane's scarred face. His voice dropped to a whisper, but it carried more weight than a shout. "You think you wear the law, Marshal, but I've bled for this town, buried friends under its dust. Justice don't come in carriages." Durning leaned closer, eyes cold. "And justice don't come 1 second late." The words struck like a bullet. Kane's scar burned as if torn fresh, his hand tightening on the badge until the edge cut his palm. When Durning left, Kane remained in the silence, blood beating against silver. His Colt sat heavy at his side. The gallows loomed in his thoughts, the courthouse doors waiting to judge him not for his sins alone, but for what he had become. Outside, the storm broke fully, wind howling through the streets, rain hammering down. Dry Creek shivered under the weight of 2 lawmen, one bound by a badge, the other bound by guilt. And in the dark of his office, Sheriff Kane whispered to himself, voice raw, "If the badge hangs me, so be it. But justice rides with me still." The storm swallowed his words, but the night carried them, drifting through the empty gallows that swayed in the wind, waiting for the rope to find its neck. The courthouse bell tolled again, a hollow note lost in the storm. Kane sat in the jailhouse with the lantern guttering, rain scratching the windows like nails. On the desk before him lay 2 things, his blood-spotted badge and the folded letter he had pulled from Rafe Mallory's dying coat. For nights he had refused to open it, bound by a friend's last whisper, "Not yet." But dawn was coming, and with it, Marshal Durning's judgment. If there was ever a yet, it was now. Kane lit a fresh match and touched it to the lamp wick. The flame leapt, gold chasing the shadows back into the bars of the cells. His hands shook as he broke the seal. The paper cracked like dry leaves. The words inside were written in Rafe's heavy hand. "Eddings is in league with the Marshal. The town is being sold piece by piece. Land, contracts, rights of way. I was caught between. Thought I could buy them off to protect my sister. Thought I could keep Kane clear of it. If you're reading this, I failed. Trust no one with a badge but yourself." The lines blurred. Kane's scar twitched. Betrayal wasn't just a rumor. It was ink and blood. Rafe had been playing both sides, not to harm Kane, but to shield him. And yet Kane had been too slow, too blind, too late. A rap came at the back door. Kane stuffed the letter inside his duster and eased his colty free. When he opened, Lorna Vale, the saloon keeper, slipped in, cloak dripping. Her eyes darted toward the cells. "You think you're the only one Durning's after?" She whispered. "He's buying testimony, paying men to swear they saw you throw the duel, that you meant Rafe dead, and the mayor's leading the choir." Kane's jaw tightened. Rafe knew. He tapped the hidden pocket, left me words, enough to burn Eddings and maybe your new Marshal, too. Lorna shook her head. Words won't sway a rope-hungry crowd. You need proof, more than paper. "Where?" Kane asked. "Eddings keeps his contracts in the strongbox at the Silver Ace. Tonight, he meets Durning to seal the town's sale." Her gaze softened for a moment. "If you mean to fight, Kane, fight now, or you'll swing at dawn." Kane holstered his Colt and pinned his badge back over his heart, though the metal felt heavier than iron. "Then we'll steal justice before they sell it." The Silver Ace saloon glowed warm against the storm, lamps spilling gold into the rain. Inside, voices rose over piano chords, liquor sloshing in the glasses of men too eager to forget. Kane slid through the door like a shadow, rain dripping from his hat brim. His eyes found the mayor in the back room, door cracked, lamplight leaking, and beside him, Marshal Durning. Kane moved along the wall, every board creaking a warning. He stopped at the slit of light, hearing words that nailed his suspicions down. "Transfer of ownership," Eddings was saying. "Railroad gets its line. You get your jurisdiction. Town belongs to you." "And Kane?" Durning asked, calm as a butcher measuring weight. Eddings chuckled. "The gallows solves him. Folk already believe he threw that duel. A few swears and he'll hang righteous." Kane's fists clenched. The letter in his coat felt alive, hot as a coal. He eased his Colt free and pushed the door wide. "Funny thing," he said, voice low. "Dead men write straighter truth than living liars." Both men jolted. Durning's hand shot to his revolver, but Kane's barrel was already leveled. The mayor froze, sweat gleaming. Kane tossed the folded letter onto the table. "Rafe wrote his confession. He knew you were carving this town up like cattle. Knew you meant to use me as the butcher's dog." Durning's eyes flicked to the page, but he didn't reach. Instead, he smiled, a cold, thin line. A dead man's words carry weight only if the living believe them. Eddings swallowed. "You won't make it out that door alive, Kane. The town's drunk on your guilt." Kane stepped closer, rain dripping from his duster onto their fine papers. "Maybe, but if I fall, I'll fall pointing at the truth, and you'll spend the rest of your days running from it." The door behind Kane creaked. Boots scuffed. He turned just enough to see Whit Ransom, his deputy, standing with pistol drawn. The boy's eyes were wide, face taut with a choice. "Whit," Kane said carefully, "you can believe the lies you've been fed, or you can believe the friend we buried." Whit's hand trembled. "You think Rafe was pure? He took their money, Kane. He took it to save blood, not spill it." Kane's voice softened. "We all fall, son. Question is, who we land on." Lightning flared, white through the window. In that breath of brightness, Whit's pistol sagged. He lowered it. Not all the way, but enough. Durning's snarl broke the moment. He lunged for the table, snatching the letter. Kane fired. The bullet split the lamp glass, flame whooshing, oil spilled, fire catching across papers. Durning reeled back, letter crumpling in his fist as sparks licked it. "No!" Kane roared, diving forward. He slammed Durning against the wall, grappling for the burning page. Eddings shrieked, scrambling as the fire raced across his contracts. Wit rushed in, stamping at the flames. The letter tore in half, one piece curling black in Durning's hand, the other in Kane's grip. Smoke filled the room, acrid and choking. Kane shoved Durning away and pocketed his fragment. "Enough remains," he growled, "to hang you both." Durning's face twisted. "Then we'll hang together." He yanked his revolver. Kane dove behind the overturned table as bullets splintered wood. Eddings screamed, trapped between flame and gunfire. Wit, cursing, dragged him clear. The fire roared, smoke belching into the saloon. Patrons scattered, shouting. Kane burst through the door into the storm, the half-letter pressed to his chest. Behind him, the silver ace burned, flames clawing skyward. By dawn, ash floated on the wet air. The saloon stood a husk, timbers blackened, rafters collapsed. Bodies had been pulled clear, Eddings alive but shaken. Durning vanished into the night. The town muttered of fire and curses, of Kane's bullet, of justice twisting in smoke. Kane sat on the steps of the courthouse, soaked to the bone, watching the first gray light creep across the gallows. Wit approached, face lined by ash and doubt. "You saved half a letter," he said. "Not enough for proof. The town still wants blood. Maybe yours." Kane pulled the charred fragment from his pocket. The words were jagged but legible. "Eddings in league with the Marshal. The town is being sold. Dead men don't lie, Wit." Kane's voice was quiet, iron under gravel. "This piece is enough to plant doubt, and doubt is a seed that grows fast in a guilty man's shadow." Wit stared at him, torn. "And if it's not enough?" Kane rose, scar catching the dawn. His eyes burned cold. "Then law or no law, I'll ride down the truth myself. Because justice ain't something you buy, it's something you bleed." The gallows creaked in the morning wind, a rope swaying like a finger pointing at the sheriff. Kane's hand rested on his Colt, the badge heavy on his chest, as if daring the town, and the Marshal hiding in its shadows, to decide who would swing first. The boy's hand shook as he held out the blackened scrap. Ash still clung to his nails. Soot streaked his cheeks. "Sheriff Kane," he stammered. "This was under the joists. Has Rafe's mark on it." Kane took the scrap gently, like it might crumble if he breathed too hard. The writing was jagged but still Rafe's hand. "Do not trust the Marshal. He means to gut the town. If I fall, tell Kane." The last words were lost to fire. But the signature, Rafe Mallory, burned through smoke and time. The crowd pressed closer, faces pinched, eyes ravenous. Proof, maybe. Or another rope's worth of doubt. Whit Ransom lingered at the edge, his blue eyes restless. The boy he'd been wrestling with the lawman he thought he wanted to be. Kane tucked the fragment into his coat, close to his heart. He looked up at the gallows, the noose twisting in the morning wind. The courthouse bell tolled, summoning the inquest that had become more trial than hearing. It was time to step into judgment. Aditram. The courthouse was packed, every plank groaning under the weight of bodies and suspicion. The broken rafters let shafts of light slice through smoke from the smoldering silver ace. Kane walked to the center with measured steps, his duster trailing dust and ash, his Colt heavy at his side. He laid the fragment of Rafe's words on the judge's bench. "Proof enough," he said, voice low but carrying. "My friend wasn't my betrayer. He was warning us. Eddings sold this town, and the Marshal came here not for justice, but for coin." Gasps rippled through the benches. Eddings, pale and bandaged from the fire, staggered forward. "A lie," he croaked. "That's nothing but ashes and forgery." Kane's eyes pinned him cold. "Then why does your name stain every ledger in the saloon that burned?" The preacher raised the fragment high, reading aloud the surviving words. The townsfolk shifted, murmurs rising, suspicion thickening like smoke. Some spat Eddings's name. Others stared at Kane with haunted relief. Then the back doors thundered open. Marshal Durning entered, flanked by 2 deputies in federal gray. His badge gleamed, unmarred by ash. His eyes scanned the room and fixed on Kane. "You think scraps absolve you? Rafe Mallory was in league with me. He confessed as much before he died." Lies fell from his lips like gospel. Some nodded, hungry for the neatness of it. Others wavered. Kane could feel the tide tipping back toward the rope. Wit stood, voice breaking but clear. "I saw the ledger. I saw the payoffs. Rafe wasn't betraying Kane. He was caught between you and the mayor, and he paid for it." The hall erupted. Shouts clashed. Justice, betrayal, hang him, set him free. The judge slammed the gavel, but the sound drowned. Durning's deputies shoved through the benches, rifles glinting. "By order of federal law," Durning thundered, "Sheriff Kane is suspended, arrested, and tried as guilty. He will hang today." Kane felt the gallows waiting outside, every knot, every plank. His hand brushed his badge, the metal cold as winter. He could surrender, let law, twisted and poisoned, take him, or he could draw, break the very order he had bled to uphold. The crowd pressed, torn between fear and fury. A child cried. The judge muttered prayers. Kane's scar ached as he closed his eyes, and in that darkness he saw Rafe's hand gripping his wrist as he bled out. Not yet. He saw his wife and boy, ghosts with eyes full of questions. Law ain't always justice, but justice rides with me. He opened his eyes. The decision was no longer waiting. It was here. Kane stepped forward, silver badge flashing once in the fractured light. His voice cut through the chaos. "I will not hang for your lies, Marshal, and I will not let this town be sold." His hand blurred to the Colt. The shot cracked like thunder. One of Durning's deputies spun and fell, rifle clattering across the planks. Screams tore the air. Durning's pistol leapt from its holster, flame barking. Splinters erupted from the bench where Kane had stood an instant before. Chaos reigned. Townsfolk dove for cover, some cheering, others cursing. Wit drew and fired, his bullet smashing the second deputy back against the wall. Kane rose from behind the bench, eyes locked on Durning. Their guns spoke again. Kane's bullet scored the Marshal's shoulder, spinning him. Durning staggered, blood blooming bright, but he didn't fall. His grin was jagged, savage. "Now you're no lawman," he spat, voice ragged. "You're just another outlaw with a badge." Kane's heart pounded like war drums. He knew what he had chosen. He had crossed the line. Law was gone. Only justice, raw and terrible, remained. The townsfolk surged, half toward the gallows, half toward Kane. The courthouse thundered with boots, cries, and gunfire. Kane dove for the judge's gavel and slammed it down, the sound booming above the din. "Listen to me," he roared. This town belongs to its people, not to bought mayors, not to federals with silver tongues. Rafe died to give us the truth. I'll not let that death be hollow." For a heartbeat the noise faltered. Faces turned, torn but listening. Whit raised his revolver skyward and fired once. The crack silenced the room. Eddings collapsed into a bench, mumbling, "It's true. I signed it all." His voice broke, years of greed unraveling in one breath. All eyes turned to Durning. Blood on his shoulder, rage burning cold. He lifted his pistol again. "This isn't over, Kane. Not till one of us hangs." Kane leveled his Colt. The whole town seemed to lean between them, breathless, as if the earth itself waited for the final shot. And outside, the gallows creaked, noose swaying in the morning wind, as if it too hungered for the choice Kane had just made, the choice he could never take back. The storm hammered the courthouse roof, rattling broken rafters like bones. The barred doors groaned under the weight of a crowd desperate to flee or to see blood. No escape. Someone had bolted them shut from the outside, locking law, lies, and vengeance into one box. Sheriff Kane stood at the center, Colt leveled at Marshal Durning. The silver badge on his chest caught the lightning slicing through the windows. Around them the town pressed back against benches and walls, faces pale in the flicker of stormlight. Every soul present knew one truth. When the guns spoke, the town's fate would be written in blood. Durning's smile was thin as a blade. His coat was black, with rain and blood, his wounded shoulder twitching. "You've already damned yourself, Kane. Drew on federal men, spilled their blood. You'll swing for it." Kane's voice was steady gravel. "I'll swing if I must, but you'll not sell this town." They circled each other, boots grinding dust into the planks, thunder rolling in their wake. Whit Ransom stood to one side, gun in hand, sweat running down his temple. His young eyes flicked between Kane and the Marshal, caught between the law he'd sworn and the justice he'd begun to believe. The townsfolk shifted, whispering, praying, gasping. The preacher clutched his Bible, lips moving. The mayor hunched small on a bench, the weight of his confession dragging him down. The storm gave them no mercy. Lightning strobed, and for a moment Kane saw his wife's ghost in the flash, her face turned away, and his boy's small hand slipping from his. The scar on his jaw burned. He had failed too many times. Not this time. "Law ain't always justice," he said, words low but carrying. His thumb eased back the Colt's hammer. "But justice rides with me." The room seemed to hold its breath. Durning lunged first. His pistol spat fire. Kane twisted, felt hot air graze his ribs, and answered with a shot of his own. The report cracked like the heavens breaking. Durning staggered, shoulder snapping back, yet still he fired again, wild and desperate. Glass shattered. A woman screamed. Whit fired next, his bullet striking the Marshal's hip, spinning him toward the wall. Durning roared, teeth bared, and raised his revolver again, determined to drag Kane into hell with him. Kane stepped forward through the thunder, scar tight, eyes burning cold steel. He fired once more. The bullet took Durning's center chest. The Marshal's grin froze, then crumbled. His pistol clattered to the planks. He collapsed against the judge's bench, leaving a crimson smear as he slid to the floor. Silence fell, heavy as a coffin lid. For a long breath, no one moved. The storm itself seemed to wait. Then the mayor wailed, breaking down in sobs. The preacher closed his eyes and whispered, So be it. Kane holstered his Colt, slow and deliberate. He walked to the fallen Marshal, knelt, and pressed 2 fingers to the man's throat. No pulse. Only the echo of a life spent bending law into a whip. He rose, silver badge gleaming dark with rain and blood. "It's done," he said, voice raw. "The man who would have sold you is gone. The man who would have hanged me is gone. What remains is yours, the town, the choice. You can keep the law in the hands of liars, or you can make it clean again. But know this, every choice costs." The people shifted, uncertain, fearful, some hopeful. Whit lowered his gun, eyes wet, and stepped to Kane's side. "I'll stand with him," he said. "If he bleeds for this town, so will I." A murmur rippled. Others nodded slowly, unsure but willing. The preacher raised his hand. Justice was done here, though not in any book. "Let us write a new one." Kane looked to the gallows outside the courthouse window. The noose swayed in the storm wind, rope glistening. It could still be his. The people might yet demand it. He could see it. The badge spinning free of his chest, his boots kicking dust from the platform, his breath cut short. He closed his eyes, whispered to ghosts only he could hear. "I've carried the badge as long as I could. If I've damned myself, let it be for something true." The crowd stirred again. A woman cried out, "Marshal's dead. Kane saved us." Another spat, "He's still a killer." The room shivered, balanced on the edge of judgment. Then Whit stepped onto the judge's bench, raising his revolver high. "Listen. You saw who fired first. You saw the Marshal's dealings. You heard the mayor confess. Kane didn't murder. He protected. He chose justice when law failed." Silence spread, fragile but real. Eyes turned to Kane, who stood tall in the broken light, his duster dripping, scar burning, Colt heavy on his hip. He waited, ready for the rope or the road. At last the preacher spoke, his voice solemn. "The badge stays with him, if he'll bear it still." The townsfolk murmured assent, reluctant but rising, a tide of weary trust. Some turned away, not ready to forgive, but enough nodded, enough lifted hands. Kane's eyes closed, just once. The weight in his chest shifted, no lighter, only different. He touched the badge, blood-stained silver, and pinned it firm. "I'll bear it," he said, "but don't mistake me. A badge don't cleanse the soul. Only deeds can do that, and my soul's still black." Thunder rolled. The storm began to ease, rain softening, air clearing as if the heavens themselves acknowledged the verdict. Kane stepped down from the bench, boots echoing. He passed the body of Marshal Durning, the ruined mayor, the broken gallows beyond the window. His shadow stretched long across the courthouse floor. Whit caught his arm. "Sheriff, you could have chosen the rope. You didn't." Kane looked at him, eyes hollow, scar burning like a brand. "That was the choice, boy. Once made, it don't unmake." He pushed through the doors into the damp light of dawn. The street smelled of wet dust, smoke, and iron. People gathered, watching him with awe, with fear, with hope. The gallows creaked behind him, empty, for now. Sheriff Kane pulled his hat low, felt the badge cold against his chest, and walked into the storm's fading breath, knowing justice had cost him more than law ever could. The courthouse fight etched itself into Dry Creek's memory like a scar on rawhide. Folks would tell it in whispers, how Marshal Durning came with polished boots and federal law, and how Kane gunned him down before the town's own eyes. To some, Kane had saved them. To others, he had damned himself beyond redemption. But Kane carried no illusions. He had crossed the line, fired first against the law he once swore to uphold. He had made the irreversible choice: justice over law, truth over order. The badge still gleamed on his chest, but now it cut him deeper than any bullet. At night, when the wind scoured the empty gallows and the church bell tolled hollow, Kane sat alone with whiskey and ghosts. He thought of Rafe, of the letter charred but true, of the boy Wit who still looked at him like a guide. He thought of his wife and son, gone to violence he could never undo. And he asked himself always, am I a savior or an executioner? There was never an answer, only the whisper of rope in the wind.